Welcome back. Last time we were getting into strategic alliances,
Right.
With those notes that you shared from Allan B. Smithee.
Yeah, his insights are something else, aren't they?
Real insider perspective on
Absolutely.
how companies decide to team up, or at least try to.
Yeah, and all the ways it can go wrong. We saw those potential pitfalls, right? Like clashing company cultures.
Oh yeah,
Totally different ideas about what success looks like.
totally.
Even one partner trying to outmaneuver the other.
It happens. But that brings us to, I guess you could say, an even deeper level of corporate
Entanglement.
yeah, joint ventures. This is like if strategic alliances are dating,
Okay.
like Smithee says.
Yeah.
Joint ventures are like the full-on marriage.
With a joint checking account and everything, right?
Exactly. And you know what I find interesting about Smithee's take on this?
So what's that?
He really gets into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
Like he points out that these ventures, they often pop up when you've got companies dealing with massive, massive challenges.
Right, the kind of things they couldn't even dream of tackling on their own.
Exactly. We're talking huge infrastructure projects, risky moves into new markets,
Oh, absolutely. Or even developing some game-changing technology. Things with, like, huge capital investment.
Huge, yes.
Huge risks.
So it's kind of like safety in numbers.
In a way, yeah. I mean, you're pooling resources, sharing the risk, just like we see with strategic alliances, but it's...
Amplified.
Exactly. And this is where Smithee's insights get really interesting, I think, because he points out that this whole bigger is better thing, it cuts both ways.
What do you mean?
Well, the higher the stakes, the greater the potential for conflict.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Especially, and this is key, especially if the companies involved haven't really hammered out
Hammered at what?
the why of it all. Why are they doing this together?
I see.
What's the real objective?
Right.
Because without that shared understanding, things can unravel pretty quickly.
Okay, so let's break that down. What does Smithee say about the companies, the ones who actually make these joint ventures work? What makes them different?
One thing that pops up again and again in his notes is the importance of a shared vision.
Okay.
And I don't just mean some vague idea of, hey, let's work together and do something amazing.
Yeah.
He's talking about laser focus, real clarity about what the JV is ultimately trying to achieve.
I like that. Laser focus.
What are you building? What does success look like? And this is important. What does it look like for both sides?
So it's kind of like any good partnership, right? You've got to be on the same page about where you're going before you even start packing the car.
Exactly. And, when this really comes into play, according to Smithee, the negotiation phase.
Makes sense.
That's where it all starts.
Right.
And he noticed this pattern with the successful JVs.
Okay.
The partners were willing to hash out not just what they were going to do, but how they were going to do it.
Interesting. So it's not just about splitting up the pie.
Right.
It's about agreeing on the recipe first.
You got it. In fact, Smithee even talks about specific cases where one side played hardball in the negotiations.
Oh, I bet that went well.
Well, they might have gotten what they wanted on paper.
Yeah.
But it created this undercurrent of,
Like resentment.
Exactly. And that poisoned the whole venture from the start.
Wow.
So shared vision, careful negotiation, got it.
Mm-hmm.
But what about when things go sideways? Because let's face it, even with the best intentions, things don't always go according to plan.
Right. So what happens when the JV hits a snag? Smithee's notes have to have some wisdom about how to navigate those rough waters.
They absolutely do. And this is where his insights become pure gold for anyone even thinking about a JV.
Okay, I'm ready.
He really stresses this point. Anticipating potential problems isn't about being pessimistic. It's about being prepared.
Yeah.
He's got this analogy in his notes. I love it.
Okay, what is it?
He says, thinking about a joint venture breaking up,
Yeah.
it's like planning a fire drill in the middle of the wedding reception.
Okay.
No one wants to think about it.
Right.
But boy, are you glad you practiced if that alarm ever goes off.
That's a good one. Practical, though, not very romantic.
Right. But hey, business is business, right?
True enough.
Yeah.
So how do you actually practice for a JV breakup? What does that even look like?
It starts right at the beginning in the negotiation phase.
Okay.
You've got to address those what-if scenarios.
Yeah.
Smithee noticed that the JVs that did well, they often had really detailed exit strategies worked out in advance.
Interesting.
They figured out how they'd split up their assets, how intellectual property rights would be handled, even how they'd settle disputes.
So it's like a prenup But for a business partnership?
Exactly. You hope you never need it,
Right.
but it's there to make sure everyone knows what happens if things go south.
Yeah, I get it. It provides clarity, security.
Exactly. And you know what Smithee really emphasizes here? This whole upfront planning thing, it's not about being negative or assuming the worst is going to happen.
No.
It's about being realistic. It's about acknowledging that even if everyone's totally on board at the start,
Yeah.
things change. Circumstances change. Markets shift.
Right.
Sometimes what seemed like a perfect match just doesn't work out.
That makes sense. Speaking of which, there's that case study in Smithee's notes.
Which one?
The one with Johnson Controls and SAF Group.
Oh, yeah.
That one really stuck with me. You had these two powerhouses in the battery world
Huge players.
coming together to go after that electric vehicle boom.
Yeah.
Seemed like a no-brainer, right?
Like a slam dunk.
Total slam dunk. But then it all went, well,
Yeah.
it fell apart pretty quickly. What happened there?
It's a perfect example of why those what-if conversations are so crucial right from the get-go.
Oh.
You see, both companies, they went into it super optimistic,
Yeah.
but they hadn't really gotten on the same page about their long-term goals or how they'd handle disagreements.
Oh, so it was a classic case of misaligned expectations.
100%. And because they hadn't set up a system for dealing with those differences, those little cracks, they turned into a giant chasm.
Yikes.
Communication broke down, trust evaporated,
That's rough.
and eventually Johnson Controls, they actually took legal action to end the whole thing.
Oh, wow. So it turned into a whole legal battle.
A big one, really expensive, really messy.
What a cautionary tale. This really drives home what Smithee was saying about clear communication and that shared vision.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious, how much of that struggle do you think stemmed from the power dynamic in that partnership? Because Johnson Controls was the bigger player.
Way bigger.
Was it like destined to fail from the start?
That's a great question, and it's something Smithee wrestles with in his notes.
Yeah.
He noticed that these lopsided partnerships, they can work,
Okay.
but they need a ton of vigilance
Okay.
and proactive communication. He says those smaller partners, they really have to be careful.
What do you mean?
Well, it's easy to be blinded by the big companies' resources, their access to markets, all of that.
Right.
And forget about your own goals and your own boundaries.
Okay, so you're saying smaller partners need to be clear on what they want and be ready to walk away if the deal isn't good for them.
Exactly. And for the bigger partners, Smithee says it's all about transparency and genuine respect.
Okay.
You got to value the smaller partners' expertise,
Right.
their contributions.
Got it.
It has to be a true partnership, not a slow motion takeover, you know?
So no matter the size of the partners, it all boils down to trust, open communication, and understanding what everyone brings to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if I can add one more thing that Smithee talks about,
Go for it.
the best joint ventures, they don't treat their agreements like these fixed, unchangeable documents.
Okay.
They see them as frameworks that need to evolve along with the partnership.
That's interesting.
They get that unexpected things are going to pop up, markets will change, and what worked at the beginning might need to be revisited later on.
So flexibility and adaptability are key.
Exactly. You can't just stick to the letter of the original agreement.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to adjust as you go.
Makes sense.
And that brings us back to trust and open communication.
Right. Because without that,
Without that, those bumps in the road,
Yeah.
they can easily turn into,
total disasters.
exactly, relationship-ending disasters.
It's really amazing when you think about it,
What's that?
how Smithee can take something as, complex as a joint venture
Right.
and make it clear how much it's about relationships.
It is. You know, he has this point in his notes
Okay.
that I think it's lost sometimes in all the talk about contracts and profits and all that.
Yeah.
It's the human element.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Like, you can have the best lawyers in the world, the most promising idea, everything.
Right.
But if the people involved can't communicate,
Yeah.
if they don't trust each other,
Right.
it's all going to fall apart.
Makes you think about those celebrity partnerships, right?
Oh, totally.
The ones where, like, egos clash
Oh, yeah.
and their big clothing line or whatever just goes up in smoke.
He's like, the bigger they are,
I was just thinking that.
the harder they fall. Right.
And the more it seems like those people skills, those dynamics become super important.
You hit the nail on the head. And Smithee, he brings this up in a really interesting way.
How so?
He talks about conflict resolution.
Okay.
He noticed that in the JVs that went well, disagreements still happened.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it wasn't about like one side winning and the other losing.
Yeah.
It was about finding a way forward that worked for everyone.
So collaboration, not combat.
Exactly. And to do that, Smithee saw that the successful JVs, They'd set up these communication channels and these
Right.
ways to resolve conflicts right from the beginning.
Oh, so when those disagreements inevitably came up,
Right.
they were ready.
They had a system, a framework.
That's smart.
Yeah.
It's like agreeing on how you'll argue before you even have an argument.
That's a great way to put it.
Takes the emotion out of it, right?
Absolutely. Helps you stay focused on finding that solution.
And that takes us back to what we were talking about earlier, doesn't it? That shared vision.
100%.
When everyone's clear on the goals,
Yeah.
even when there's a disagreement,
Right.
it's easier to find a solution that still moves everyone in the right direction.
Exactly. You've got to keep your eyes on the prize, even when things get tough.
Okay, so to sum all this up for our listeners,
Yeah.
it sounds like a joint venture. It's not something to jump into lightly.
Definitely not. It can be amazing, but
You've really got to go in with your eyes wide open.
couldn't agree more.
Have a solid plan, and maybe even more importantly,
What's that?
choose the right partner.
Oh, that's huge. You know, if there's one big takeaway from all of Smithee's wisdom, I think it's this.
Okay.
Joint ventures, they're not a one-size-fits-all solution, right?
Right, they're not a magic bullet.
Exactly. They take careful thought.
Planning.
And this is key, a real commitment to open, honest communication.
Throughout the whole process.
The whole thing, from that first handshake to, well, however it all ends up.
Because, just like with any journey, having a good map.
And a reliable travel companion, right?
Exactly. So, to all our listeners out there, if you're thinking about teaming up with another company,
Yes.
remember what we've learned from Allan B. Smithee.
He's seen it all.
Choose those partners wisely. Be clear about what you want.
Communicate.
And never underestimate the power of being on the same page, having that shared vision.
Words to live by.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy venturing, everyone.